So I am going to share my screen. We're going to be working in tests today. And like I said, we are going to go over warehouse purchase orders, how they're managed, why we have to manage them, because that's a very important thing to note. And then we're going to go over just some real basic examples of the type of PO management that you'll have to do kind of in your day-to-day life. Okay, so there's obviously potentially many types of PO management situations that are going to come up, but we'll go over some of the basic ones in today's class just so you can kind of see it. So the first thing to note is the reason we have to manage warehouse purchase orders, where we don't necessarily have to manage direct POs, like we don't have to go and delete things off old direct POs, we don't have to go and close them out, that kind of thing, is because warehouse purchase orders are the only purchase orders that are taken into account when the replenishment program is calculating. So when your replenishment program runs, and you guys run replenishments, when you look at your replenishment reports, there is a supply line and a demand line. And so those columns are there to tell us this is how many you have on order from your end users that you're going to give out today. And then this is how many are on order from your supplier. And that way, when your replenishment is ran, it can take these supply and demand numbers into account so that if, like this example, you have a minimum of 25, a maximum of 30, and you have 2 on hand, you have an open order of 24. So it doesn't order you more because 24 plus 2 is higher than your minimum amount. So that's why managing these purchase orders is so important, because it directly reflects to your supply column here on your replenishment program. Now, how we manage and some of the best ways to manage this are under the inventory tab under received orders. Every property has a view called warehouse open orders. This should filter all of your warehouse orders that have a line on it that's not fully received. Okay, so in this case, we ordered this mixer from Scabuzzo's, we ordered 2, and there are still 2 that have to be delivered. So it could be the full amount, it could be a partial. This will just track everything that is not fully received. So once an item is fully received, it'll actually fall off this list because there's a number on the PO and a full receipt. Therefore, it's not going to show up on that supply as still being on order. Okay, so this is where we go to manage this. Now, I really like to say that the more accurate your orders are, the easier it is to manage this list. So if I am going to replace my replenishment report and I go to this requisition and I go to place this order, one of the things that I need to do is make sure that my need by dates are relatively accurate. So if most of this is stocked by my supplier and it's going to come on the next delivery, I can pick that next delivery date. Where if, let's say, one of these items is maybe not stocked by my supplier and it's going to take a little bit longer to get to me, I want to make sure I pick a need by date that is far enough out that I'm not prematurely checking on this and saying, oh, where is this? Why isn't this here yet? Because I know it's probably not going to get here till next week. So if I'm accurately selecting my need by dates, or as accurate as possible, when I come to this report, I can actually use this advanced search field feature, and I can select, I really only want to see things with the need by date before a certain day. And that way, I'm literally only having to check on not all my orders, but just the orders that require my attention. Okay, so if I come back here and say, well, I really only want to see orders before the 15th, I can search And these are going to be the orders here that I really need to pay attention to because they're very past due. The system thinks that they're still on order. I may not want them to still be on order. And this is where the management of POs really comes into play. So for today's example, I'm actually going to pick the Blackhawk warehouse. And so here's all my past dues. This is everything that is open right now. These are due any day now. And so really some of the older ones, that's where I want to focus. And so the first one I'm going to focus on is 470226. That's my PO number. It's right here. There's not a lot on the list, so it's right here. So I can see I ordered 45 cases and there's 2 remaining. So I happen to know where if you don't know this about your product, now's a great time to learn. You'll either need to contact your supplier or your buyer to help you figure it out. But we need to know what our lead times are. We need to know items like this. Are they going to fill this back order? Does my supplier normally fill back orders? Or is this what we call a fill and kill? Where if the supplier has it, they bring me what they have, they bring me up to what I ordered or as much as they can. And then if there's a back ordered amount, I just need to reorder that. Okay, so that's kind of a fill or kill. There are some items that we stock in our warehouses that maybe they do fill back orders, or maybe it's a longer lead time. So I need to give that supplier a little bit more time to deliver this than I normally would for their weekly orders. So I need to understand what the expectation is for all my warehouse items to manage my purchase orders. In this case, I know that these 2 cases will not be redelivered. Corona and Coors, that's a fill or kill type item. So they bring me what they can. If they can't bring it, I need to reorder it. So I'm going to select the PO number and I am going to scroll to the bottom of my purchase order and I'm going to hit the request change button. You'll see some extra options that I have here. That is because of my access. As a warehouse manager, warehouse supervisor, you're probably not going to have some of these buttons. You need to focus on the request change button for this function. So I'm going to hit request change. And what's going to happen is I am going to go find my Corona on this purchase order. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find Corona. And I know I've received 43. So I'm going to change this to 43. Because that will make this a fully received purchase order. It's going to get rid of those extra 2 that the system keeps thinking I have on order. And I'm going to look, this is my approval chain. So the buyers have to double check my work. That's always helpful. And then depending on the value and what's on it, it may go to my approver. So I'm going to submit the change request. And that once the purchase order change is approved, those 2 are actually going to drop off my report. So for the example today, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to approve all these. So we can kind of look at what that looks like on the report. Once it's approved, what I'm going to see on my report is, I'm going to go back to inventory. And I am going to look at my unreceived orders. And I'm going to make sure my view is correct, where I'm looking at the correct warehouse that I'm working on today. And notice my filter is still here and that item is no longer here. So that is probably the most simplistic example of this process. Now, there could be an item that is 467471. We're going to look at the second PO here. And I'm looking at this bun rack cover and it's a remote stock item, meaning that it's not necessarily going to come on the very next delivery. But I noticed that my need by date is prompting this to show up in my to-do list. And I'm like, wait a minute, is this really the date it should have been here? So if I need to change this date just to kind of keep my record straight, make sure that, you know, hey, this isn't accurate. I forgot to change it when I ordered it. This really isn't going to show up until 4/16. I can go to the PO again, and I can request a change, and I can change the need by date so that it no longer shows up on my report. Now, that being said, if this is past due, that's where I can follow up with my supplier directly, or I can use the assistance of my buyers and I can say, hey, someone tell me when this bun rack cover is going to get here. Like, is it still on order? Should I still expect this? When is it going to get here? If you have an updated date, that is where you can also use the request change feature, and you can update the need by date so that when you are running this report, it's a little bit more accurate and you're not having to always turn, like always ignore this or always look at it. It makes looking at the report a lot more functional. So we're going to say it's supposed to be here on 4/13. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to submit the change request. It's going to go through the same approvals. But that way, when I'm looking at my report, it's a little bit more accurate and I'm only looking at the things that are truly past due. Okay. So that's kind of a second option when we're looking at managing purchase orders. The third option, or the third example I have for today, is another purchase order number, and I'm going to type that in here. And this one has several items on it, right? They're all from Cisco. And these are all, as you can see, the stock status listed here. They're stocked at Cisco, so I should have gotten these on 3/17, and I didn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of perform the same function, right? I'm going to click on the PO, and I am going to scroll down to the bottom, and I'm going to modify or request a change again. And because this is a larger purchase order, right, it is going to take me a few options to do this. So once I'm in the request change feature, I'm going to look for the 4 items on here that I need to request changes to. Okay. So if I look, I can immediately see like this has been received in full. That's not an item. This has been received in full. That's not an item I need to change. You can also just keep the other screen open, and you can use 2 screens to double check yourself. Totally up to you what you want to do. But as I scroll down, I can see that this one is not received. But what do I do? Because there's 5 here and it's not giving me a delete option. So we're going to come back to that because that's unique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep scrolling. And when I get to some other options of the items that I haven't received enough, you can see, again, not giving me a delete function. Like, what's going on? So this is giving me a delete function, which is great. So I'm going to delete that one because I don't need these 2 on order anymore. When I keep scrolling, I'm going to notice the 4th item is going to have a apparently I missed the 4th item. So, but that's what you'll typically see. That's how you delete items, is it'll have that red X. But we noticed, wait a minute, the T and the sesame oil didn't have a red X. What's going on? How do I delete them? So my recommendation to you during this process is you find the item, and obviously we can't delete it because it's not giving us the option. The first step you want to take is actually changing the quantity to 1, right? Because we want to make it as few on order as possible to least affect our replenishment program. So I'm going to change this to 1 in the meantime, but then we're going to take another step after this and we're going to research why I can't delete this item. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and I'm going to submit the change request. Because I do want to change the few things that I could change. And now I need to find out, like, hey, why is this not letting me change this? Like, this is really weird. What's going on? And so I am going to approve all of the changes as part of this exercise. We're just going to pretend everybody approved our changes really, really fast. And The next step is I'm going to find out why I can't delete it. So there's typically two reasons why the system won't let you delete something off of a purchase order, okay? The first is that there's a receipt to it. So if you've received it accidentally, the system's not going to let you delete it until you void your receipt. And then you should be able to delete the line. So that's the first one. The second one, which is a little bit, so the first one was super simple, right? We all know how to void a receipt. We all can double check the paperwork and be like, oops, accidentally received that, shouldn't have, bummer. The second one's a little bit more complicated, okay? So the second one is more complicated because the reason it's not letting us delete it is because there's an invoice attached to it. So as we know, right, when I receive Sysco or US Foods on my dock, sometimes they invoice me for things I don't get. They invoice me for things that they're bringing me, but it's the wrong spec, it's a sub, it's a mispick, it's damaged, it's rotten. There's lots of reasons, right, that the invoice potentially isn't going to match what I am going to receive in my system, okay? And so for me to confirm that, I'm going to click on the purchase order again, and I'm not going to go down and hit the change request, but I am going to look at the invoiced dollars here. So I'm going to find my T. So you can scroll and you can see there's some invoiced dollars here. So like, what is going on? It's not letting me delete this because there's invoices attached here. So the same thing is going on with my sesame oil. So if I scroll down and I look at my sesame oil, there's an invoice here. What do I do? So unfortunately, because the invoices are not paid yet, they're still pending, because we haven't confirmed that this is fully invoiced against, we can't close this purchase order early, guys. So that's one of the key things about Coupa. The purchase order is actually the document that the invoice is attached to. So we can't close the PO to get these off our report. We have to kind of manage through this process. So we can do a couple of different things. This invoice, we can work with the vendor to get a credit towards this, right? Once the credit is applied, we still won't be able to delete the line because there's invoices attached to it. But by the time the credit is attached, all of the invoices should move to that approved and paid status. And if the rest of the order is fully invoiced, fully received, we can then ask a buyer to help us close the PO. That is the only time that it is acceptable to close a purchase order for a warehouse, is if we know that it is fully invoiced against. And we know, guys, we don't just assume, we don't look at it and say, oh, well, most of it looks good. We actually verify with the supplier, hey, we've paid all the invoices to this PO, right? So that's option one. Option two is we can work with accounts payable and get this line from this invoice taken off. That will allow us to delete this line again. In this case, if I right click and open this invoice in a new tab, I can see this is an invoice for just this oil. And what I'm going to do is to show you guys how kind of the functionality is, if I've worked with AP and I'm like, hey, we're never going to pay this. We didn't get this. It was shorted. Here's the paperwork. Please void this invoice. We're not paying it. So what we can do is we can actually dispute this and say, this is an AP function, guys. So FYI, we are going to give them the right reason and say, you know what, we're definitely not paying this. I am going to dispute this back to my supplier. And then as an AP person, I'm actually going to come and I'm going to void this receipt. I'm going to void this invoice, not just dispute it. Okay, so that's actually a really important part of this, is that I am actually going to void this invoice. Once the invoice is taken care of, once it's in a voided status, we can then actually go back to the PO and remove this line. Okay, So those are the steps of managing POs in Coupa. And kind of what you do when you run into a situation like this where there may be an invoice attached and we need to kind of get it corrected. Those are the people that you're going to work with to kind of get it corrected, I want to say, as much as that makes sense. And I think that is kind of our basic examples of PO management for warehouse. Hopefully this has kind of been helpful.